Hey, third graders, we are still continuing Sideways Stories from Wayside School, and we are on chapter 14, which is pretty cool. And this one is called Sammy. Can you guys see Sammy? It's like a little guy inside a giant coat. Okay. It was horrible, stinky, rainy day. Some rainy days are fun and exciting, but not this one. This one stunk. All the children were wet and wore smelly raincoats. The whole room smelled awful. "Oh, it stinks in here," said Mauricia. Everybody laughed, but she was right. There was one good thing, however. There was a new boy in class. New kids are always fun, except no one could even tell what the new boy looked like. He was completely covered in his raincoat. "Class," said Mrs. Jules, "I'd like you all to meet Sammy. Let us show him what a nice class that we can be." Leslie walked up and smiled at Sammy, but her smile quickly turned to a frown. "You smell terrible," she said. "Leslie," said Mrs. Jules, "that is no way to greet a new member of our class." Mrs. Jules wrote Leslie's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. "But he does, Mrs. Jules," said Leslie. "He smells awful." "You're ugly," Sammy replied. "Now, Sammy, that is no way to talk," said Mrs. Jules. "Leslie is a very pretty girl." "She's ugly," said Sammy. Allison spoke up. "Well, you smell terrible and are probably even uglier, but nobody can see you because you're hiding under a smelly old raincoat." That will be enough of that," said Mrs. Jules. "Now, Sammy, why don't you take off your coat and hang it in the closet? Let us all see how nice you look." "I don't want to, you old windbag," said Sammy. "That's because he's so ugly," said Leslie. "I'm sure he's quite handsome," said Mrs. Jules. "He's just shy. Here, let me help you." Mrs. Jules took off Sammy's coat for him, but underneath it was still another raincoat, even dirtier and smellier than the first one. They still couldn't see his face. "Oh, now he smells even worse," said Mauricia. "You don't exactly smell like a rose either," said Sammy. Mrs. Jules took off a second coat, but there was still another one under that. And the smell became so bad that Mrs. Jules had to run and stick her head out the window to get some fresh air. "You're all a bunch of pigs," Sammy screeched. "Dirty, rotten pigs." The smell was overpowering. Sammy just stood there, hidden underneath his raincoats. Mrs. Jules wrote Sammy's name under the word discipline. Send him home on the kindergarten bus," said Joy. "Not with me," said Todd. Mrs. Jules held her nose, walked up to Sammy, and removed his raincoat. She threw it out the window, but he still had another one on. Sammy hissed, "Hey, you old windbag, watch where you throw my good clothes." Mrs. Jules put a check next to Sammy's name on the blackboard. Then she took off another raincoat and threw it out the window. The smell got worse, for he had on still another one. Sammy began to laugh. His horrible laugh was even worse than this horrible voice. When Sammy first came into the room, he was 4 feet tall, but after Mrs. Jules removed 6 of his raincoats, he was only 3 feet tall. And there was still more raincoats to go. Mrs. Jules circled his name and removed another coat. She threw that one out the window. Then she put a triangle under the circle and threw another one out of his coats. Another one of his coats outside. She kept doing this until Sammy was only 1.5 feet high. That is really short. That's like the size of a baby. With every coat she took off, Sammy's laugh got louder and the smell got worse. Some of the kids held their nose, and some of them held their ears. And others could only hold one ear because they were holding their nose with the other hand. It was hard to say which was worse, the laugh or the smell. Sammy stopped laughing and said, "Hey, you old windbag, if you take off one more of my coats and throw it out the window, I will bite your head off." They smell too bad for me to allow them into the classroom," said Mrs. Jules. "You can pick them up when you leave." "They smell better than you do, pighead," Sammy shouted. Mrs. Jules did not stop. She took off another one of his coats and another and another. Sammy was only 4 inches tall, 3 inches tall, 2 inches tall. At last she removed the final coat. All that was there was a dead rat. "Well, I don't allow dead rats in my classroom," said Mrs. Jules. She picked it up by the tail, put it into a plastic bag, and threw it away. Mrs. Jules didn't allow dead rats in her class. Todd once brought a dead rat for show and tell, and Mrs. Jules made him throw that one away too. I'm glad Sammy isn't allowed in our classroom, said Rondi. I don't like him very much. Yes, said Mrs. Jules. We caught the other one. Dead rats were always trying to sneak into Mrs. Jules' class. That was the third one that she had caught since September. Okay, that one's really weird. That's a weird story. Then how does it talk if it's dead? I don't understand this. Okay. Next week is Dee Dee. And Dee Dee looks 100% better than the last story we just wrote. She's pretty cool. She can play soccer in a skirt. That's pretty awesome. All right. So next week we will read chapter 15, Dee Dee. I hope you guys have a good week. And next week, remember, we are going to be in person in the library, which will be super fun. You guys will get to check out books and have reading time, so we'll be reading in person. I will still read to Purple Group on the recordings, so you can still follow along with the class. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.